Greetings, reader. I hope you're staying warm in these cold times. Doesn't the weather just make you want to cozy up with a good book? This is what I've been reading, Doorways in the Sand by Roger Zelazny. Come inside, let's talk about it. Roger Zelazny, the old zany Zelaz, was a renowned fantasy and sci-fi author of the mid to late 1900s. A six-time winner of the Hugo Award, three-timer for the Nebula Award, two times for the Locust Award, various other Neil Gaiman's biggest inspiration, Zelazny was, without a doubt, an important and prolific writer. 1976's Doorways in the Sand is my first Zelazny novel, but it won't be my last. This book was quirky, fun, and extremely strange. I found the plot to be engaging, the writing choices interesting, and the genre choices fascinating. Most of all, though, it's a book that defies categorization. Let's talk about it. Doorways in the Sand follows Fred Cassidy, a snarky academic who lives off a hearty allowance from his dead uncle that's dependent on his undergraduate enrollment at university. Fred, dodging degree completions and switching majors each semester, is a 13th year Harvard undergrad. In this warped version of the near future, Earth is being inducted into a galactic federation after aliens have finally found our little blue marble. As tokens of trust, the aliens have traded our Mona Lisa and British Crown jewels in exchange for the Starstone, a crystal which even the aliens aren't certain what it represents, and the Renus machine, a big hunk of gears and a Mobius strip conveyor belt that reverses anything put through it. When the Starstone is discovered to be stolen, Fred and his roommate Hal are the last two people to have seen it. Fred gets tortured for its whereabouts by Anglophilic goons who are toasting the Queen, then saved by two alien officers disguised as a wombat and a kangaroo, who want to take Fred to an off-planet telepath to interrogate his subconscious. But he's saved by a super-intelligent voice in his head who informs him of an intergalactic law that lets him return unprobed to Earth. The novel continues with more stone-searching hijinks, including Fred going through the Renus machine, reversing his body, then getting shot in the chest, but he's fine, because his heart is on the wrong side now. He then gets telepathically interrogated by a big viney plant alien, revealing that the Starstone is actually a biological computer, and he's absorbed it one drunken night, and that's what's been talking to him. And also, there's a double fake-out with the Starstone, and a chase scene with a politically tyrannical alien cat, and a reconnection with his dead rich uncle, who wasn't actually dead but was cryogenically frozen, and also there's the book has a lot going on, okay? Fred ends up agreeing to host the Starstone and work as an alien cultural expert for the U.S. legation of the United Nations, which Fred describes as working for the State Department or the United Nations, depending on how one looks at these matters. The book is written in a strange style that I just loved. It's full of blithely explained academic concepts, like a detailed description of how chemicals reversed in the Renus machine would react with non-reversed chemicals. That's on page 105 to 106. There's a long section talking about the mating habits of a certain type of wasp from 128 to 129, and that happens directly after he gets shot in the chest. The chapter starts with, "It is good to pause periodically and reflect on the benefits to be derived from the modern system of higher education." Sure, Fred. There's also a running Lewis Carroll theme. On page 165, while Fred is in the hospital bed and the voice in his head is warning him about that tyrannical cat alien, we hear, "Our snark is a boojum." There it was again, desperate sounding this time, followed by the superimposition of massive teeth framed by upward curling lips on the far wall, then fading, gone. Snarks and boojums are both creatures of Carroll's creation, and the disembodied smile that recurs throughout the book is called Cheshire by name just 7 pages later. These academic and literary references help me understand the character of Fred, the eternal undergrad, who's completed most of each degree Harvard has to offer. This richness of academia is in contrast to the typical perception of genre fiction, being unliterary and lowbrow art forms. That's how literary critic Nancy Holland explains and refutes it in her article, Genre Fiction and the Origins of the Work of Art. We'll come back to Holland's article in a little bit. In addition to the content, the structure and physical words themselves are unconventional. Each chapter starts in media res, showing Fred in some terrible situation, then snaps backwards in time to reveal how he got there. This jittery chronology is somewhat disorienting until you realize it's happening, but then it's a neat way to start each chapter off with something exciting to spice up the confusing mystery we're following. And the words themselves, between the biocomputer's strange way of speaking in Fred's head and the world getting reversed after the Renus machine, the book is full of unconventional text. Here's what conversations with the voice in his head look like, and here's some of the backwards text Fred reads after being reversed. These effects make the book feel sci-fi, because we're literally seeing things we've never seen in a book before. Who better to talk about Zelazny's strange choices than good old Roger himself? In the 44th issue of a New Zealand science fiction literary discussion magazine called Phlogiston, editor Alex Heatley interviewed Roger Zelazny. Zelazny, talking about early publishers and their expectations, said this: "I didn't want to be typified too closely with any particular sort of writing. I hated the thought of getting categorized and then that category would be the only thing they'd buy. So I did vary things a lot. And that's why I think they never bothered me. Just let me write pretty much whatever I wanted." These categories Zelazny is trying to avoid are called genre. You can run, you can hide, but you can't escape genre. Zelazny mainly writes sci-fi and fantasy, quote, considering it restful to switch back and forth. Doorways in the Sand is definitely far on the science fiction end of that spectrum, which is made pretty clear by the aliens and spaceships and strange technologies. But the genre doesn't end there. The story follows a twisting mystery with an unlikely investigator, red herrings, and a big final reveal. Does that sound familiar? This is a detective story with everything but the corpse, the genre's dead giveaway. And the time period complicates things even further. When it was written in 1976, the story was set in the near future, with flying cars and aliens, but everything else was pretty much the same as how it was. But now, 50 years later, that near future it's set in has passed, with the regular technologies, outfits, and language reading more like history. People smoke cigarettes, handguns are the epitome of weaponry, and there's still a Queen of England. So the novel is a strange mix of alternative history and alternative future. But wait, there's more! The absurdism evident in the book gets turned into humor with the tone, and the many ridiculous conversations and plot events clearly point towards a comedy. Like a recounted argument on page 117, where Hal tells Fred, "You said that Dr. Richard Jordan Gatling had done more for the development of modern surgery than Halsted. He asked you what techniques Dr. Gatling had developed, and you told him that Gatling had invented the machine gun." Zelazny himself calls Doorways in the Sand a comedy, with some interjections from his partner, Jane Lindskald, in that interview. "It's one of my 5 personal favorites in all my work, possibly because it was the first humorous novel I was able to finish. I loved that book. I was cackling away while I was typing."
He laughs at his own jokes.
"If they're good ones, especially if they're ones I haven't heard before." Jane did not understand at first. She'd hear this mumbling and didn't know that I would sometimes rehearse dialogue, kind of sotto voce, while sitting at my typewriter.
That's a polite way of saying he talks to himself.
This genre play made the book really enjoyable to read. Personally, I suck at figuring out the genre of books. I love to just read and absorb the world and characters. I don't get too caught up in speculating what's going to happen next. I just keep reading. So when I figured out that the book was a detective story, I was very glad to realize I wasn't supposed to know what was going on, and that it would all be revealed to me at the end. This is why genre is important. As Nancy Holland explains in that article I mentioned earlier, Genre Fiction and the Origins of the Work of Art, she writes, "We all immediately know the plot of a detective novel or science fiction adventure, where it will begin, what the key stages of the story will be, and how it will end." Doorways in the Sand might shroud its genre a little bit, but once you find it, you know that there's going to be this big reveal at the end where everything makes sense. The book is confusing. If I thought I had to know what was going on the whole time, I would have been discouraged from reading further. But knowing that it would follow the trope of ending with this summative explanation, I could happily read the convoluted course of events without the burden of trying to figure it out myself. Zelazny would explain all in due time. In this way, Doorways in the Sand reminded me a lot of Jonathan Lethem's 1994 sci-fi detective novel, Gun with Occasional Music. Jonathan Lethem, a New York Times bestseller and creative writing professor, has published 13 novels, nearly all of which are either sci-fi or detective stories, and some of which, like Zelazny's Doorways in the Sand, are a strange mix of both. In addition to some coincidental overlap, like their witty detective protagonists fighting with hyper-intelligent kangaroos, these books follow similar structures, and we can use Lethem's book to analyze the genre mix of Zelazny's. First, a really brief overview of Gun with Occasional Music. Basically, you have a world with karma points, and when you run out of karma points, you get cryogenically frozen for a couple years. Also, everyone's on a ton of drugs to make them forget the bad times and feel good. Alright, our main character is a private eye who gets hired to solve the murder of a doctor, and spoilers, we learn that the doctor hired a hitman to kill a guy sleeping with his wife, but it turns out he was the one sleeping with his wife, he just forgot because of the drugs. Okay, back to the analysis. Both use their sci-fi elements not only as fun coloring for the world, but to create mysteries impossible in our reality. Both novels feature protagonists that have to fight through socio-political structures unlike the modern worlds and are set back by inhuman forces and impossible mind-altering events. That's cryo-freeze and specialized drugs for Lethem, internal and external aliens for Zelazny, plus more cryo-freeze. Finally, the big reveal. Zelazny's mystery wraps up with a biocomputer alien and motives based on the whims of intergalactic politics, and Lethem's revolve around karma points and the death of memory. These mysteries are beautiful and impossible. In some ways, this combination of sci-fi and detective creates a genre all of its own. Reading Lethem's book set me up for success when reading Doorways in the Sand. I already struggle with detective fiction. Like I said, I just read and I have no idea what's going on until it's all explained. And adding a bunch of sci-fi stuff that isn't real and I don't understand only makes the genre more confusing. But Lethem's book set two strong expectations in my mind. Number one, there will be a big reveal where everything is explained and I don't have to worry about it. Number two, the book is probably fun and interesting anyway. Zelazny's book may have been 50% a mystery I didn't understand and didn't know was a mystery, but the other 50% was funny dialogue and good writing and a ton of aliens. Let's talk about aliens because they're a bucket of tropes all on their own. There are horror aliens, silly aliens, little green men, and giant tentacle aliens. There's one through line though, and it's that they're all just weird versions of things we have here on Earth. This is just a misproportioned human. Why? English professor Patrick Perrinder says, "It is impossible for man to imagine what is utterly alien to him. The utterly alien would also be the meaningless. To give meaning to something is also, inescapably, to humanize it, or to bring it within the bounds of our anthropomorphic worldview. This means we can only describe something as alien by contrast or analogy with what we already know." This comes from his article, The Alien Encounter, or Ms. Brown and Mrs. Le Guin, Le Rencontre de l'Extraterrestrial. I don't speak French. Published in Volume 6 of the scholarly journal Science Fiction Studies. Zelazny's aliens are interesting because they're so human, having relatively normal names, Charv and Ragma, speaking normal English and never appearing outside their animal costumes. They operate in a bureaucratic system with laws and treaties. It's all the same stuff we have here on Earth. That is, save for the telepath, Dr. M. This huge, viney, tentacly, hodgepodgely described monster uses assault therapy, beating the crap out of Fred, to mind read him, and other than that doesn't communicate or interact with anyone whatsoever. Zelazny's aliens, like the rest of his book, are strange. They play with tropes, sometimes leaning so heavily into humanization that Charv and Ragma feel more like talking Earth animals than disguised aliens, and sometimes defying tropes so heavily that they're largely indescribable, uncommunicating, and a big plant monster. When, upon Fred seeing Dr. M, Ragma says, "Not everyone is a member of the animal kingdom, as you define it. The doctor is a representative of a totally different line of life development than your own. Anything wrong with that? Are you prejudiced against plants or something?" I feel like Zelazny is justifying his strange, out-of-place aliens to us, the audience, and challenging us to compare it to the talking animals surrounding it. Overall, Zelazny is a smart author, extremely aware of genres and tropes. Defiant of these expectations, Zelazny has written a sci-fi book thick with irrelevant academia that's secretly a mystery without a murder, all the while being an absurd comedy of antiquated futurism, trope-defying aliens, and great one-liners. It looks like you succeeded, Zelazny. We can't typify you into any one thing. That is, anything but a must-read. Well, reader, that's all we have time for today. I hope the good atmosphere and great conversation warmed you up a little, but it's back to the cold with you. Stay safe and keep reading. I'm Will. Good night.